If you rub that any harder, we'll have to cover your eye with a patch." I started at the familiar voice as Marrow settled into the chair beside me. For a moment, I'd forgot about the eye I'd been rubbing for the better part of the last 5 minutes. I had no doubt the entire left side of my face must be puffy and red, but whatever flake of grit or dust had settled under my eyelid was still there, making tears stream over my cheek. "Might as well get me a stumpy leg and knock out a few of my teeth to complete the look," I grumbled. "It's what everyone expects anyway." The reception hall in the Vestrian Palace, with its high ceilings and hung with the banners of Queen Sheree's court. The space could have held hundreds, and while it was far from full, enough people were gathered that more than half of the chairs set out in the gallery were occupied, and strangers had no doubt been forced to sit next to each other. Yet the chairs nearest to me on all sides, and even the rows in front and behind of me, were empty. The crown had proclaimed us honored guests, but most of the nobles who had come to see the spectacle, as well as the foreign delegations, still gave me a wide berth. They whispered amongst themselves, "Captain Cinder." I hadn't gone out of my way to hide my identity, but sometimes I wondered if my presence was more help than hindrance. "We've lost everything," the man on the reception room floor was saying. He was old enough to be my father, and while his severe dark clothes and wide vowels identified him as Redmerean like my father, the straightness of his shoulders and the way he filled out his coat said he had never known hunger or struggle the way my father had. "The Duke forced us from our home. He took everything we had. My sons were in the city, and both died of the fever in the spring." Murmured sympathy rippled from the people seated in the gallery. The man on the floor looked stricken, but my sympathy didn't reach quite that far. He'd sailed into Hilltop Harbor 2 days ago, having paid passage on a merchant ship. With him, he brought 3 adult daughters and a somber wife, all dressed in heavy Redmerian cloaks and veils, and immediately demanded to see the Queen. Once at the palace, he'd then furthered his demands by requesting an armada to sail to Redmere with him and reclaim what he had lost. Whatever tragedy he thought had befallen him, he had escaped relatively unscathed. The same could not be said for everyone who had washed up on Vestria's shores after escaping Redmere these days. Most were dead, drowned from overfull and makeshift boats. Others were nearly dead, having spent whatever they had left to buy passage from the unscrupulous who saw a business opportunity, without a thought of how they would feed themselves during the journey. Where the nobleman addressing the Queen now had carried several trunks of belongings with him, these other unfortunates only had what remained on their backs. "So it's still going, then?" Marrow asked. They stretched a booted foot in front of them, gently kicking a chair ahead of us out of place. A couple glances were sent our way as it scraped on the floor, but no one was brave enough to make eye contact for long. "Still going," I said, then sniffed, wincing at the mix of salt, tar, and unwashed bodies that wafted toward me. "Did you come straight from the harbor? You could have bathed at least." "You never complained before." They inhaled exaggeratedly in my direction, then scowled. "You smell like a rose garden. It's giving me a headache." Maybe that was where the irritation in my eye came from. The Vestrian servants had a habit of putting out a perfumed bath for us every morning, and today I'd hoped the warm water would calm me before sitting through more negotiations. It had not, and perhaps even made things worse, as the strong scents made my head spin and eyes water. "Your Majesty." On the floor below, another old man stood, bowing deeply toward where Queen Sheree sat. He was even more well-dressed than the Redmerian noble, in blue velvet with a wide-brimmed hat adorned with a long white feather. "Lord Amphram," I said to Marrow, the Devaran ambassador. They sighed heavily. "I don't need their names. I already know what he's going to say."